Thanks. I haven't seen it.
It's good. I sent it.
See, Chris is with us. Hi, Chris. And Lynn.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hopefully I have the right mic connected. I believe I do.
You're good.
Excellent.
Hey, Chris.
Hi there, Jan. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Well, just finished dinner. Happy son ate his chicken, so I can't complain.
There you go. A win.
Yes, exactly. A win.
Hi, everybody.
Hey there. How you doing?
Hey, Lynn.
Oh, Lynn, I love your haircut.
Oh, I just took the scissors and trimmed it.
Very lovely. Oh, I love it. That's good. Yeah. Looks good pulled back.
We learned these things in COVID, didn't we?
I still have not been to a hairdresser, obviously.
Yeah, Susan cut my hair for the longest time, and she even let me cut hers once.
Oh my
Very
God.
nice
That's
job.
When I was in college,
Once.
I was a barber.
Ah,
Oh, wow. Okay.
A scab barber. Like scab labor, you know.
right.
I didn't have scabs at the time.
I didn't know there was a barbers union.
Well,
Oh gosh. Most definitely you have to be certified, and it's huge. 2,000 hours.
I now feel in safer hands whenever I get my beard trimmed.
that's something I don't let others do.
I've enjoyed the new establishment at Lake Can since the pandemic. They have the right procedures in place, and I've ventured a single barber visit, so I looked a little too scraggly, and there's not that level of trust with me and my wife on hair cutting. We'll get there. We're 12 years coming up in October. We'll get there, maybe by 24.
There you go. Hey, Walter.
Hello, John. Good evening, everybody.
Hi,
Hey,
Walter.
Happy fall.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm ready for the weather change, actually.
Me too.
I've always felt that spring and fall are the payoffs for living in this area, you know.
You can get through the winter.
Yep. And the summers.
So let's give everybody another minute or so, and then we'll get started. And Jose, while we're waiting, if you get a chance, go ahead and put the agenda up. Great, thanks. All right, still got some folks coming in. And Jose, be sure to remind me too. I forgot the last meeting and maybe the one before that announce where there are attendees that want to raise their hand, that they're welcome to do so.
Hello.
And make a comment.
Definitely.
Hello.
Hey, Gary.
Okay.
How are you? You're in.
Great. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. It's 7:01. So we're back on our regular schedule. So we're going to try to get through by 9 p.m. tonight. Let's see if we can get through this. And so we want to make sure we have adequate time for discussion. I know there have been times when we haven't gotten all the way through the agenda. Let's see how we can do tonight. So this is the draft agenda. Does anyone have any changes they want to see in the agenda tonight before we get started? Okay, then let's go ahead and start out. Welcome everybody. This is, oh, Jose, what number task force meeting is this? Is this? There we go, number 30. That's what I thought. I thought we were out of the 20s. So
We made it, yeah.
we made it. So welcome everybody to the September 27th, 2021 meeting of the Reston Comprehensive Plan Task Force. So we do have 2 remaining scheduled task force meetings. You know, let's see how we do. I'd say it's probably not likely that we're going to finish up on October 25th, but let's move forward tonight, see how we're doing, and maybe get a better sense of how many more meetings we might need. But I do have to say, and I want to thank everybody for all the work everyone's been doing. We are making progress. There's definitely a lot of good work going on, and I think we're getting pretty close, and we'll put that to the test a little bit tonight with a couple of potential initial task force approvals. But before we get to that, let's just go over what was discussed at the last meeting, and just to make sure that this is the consensus of the task force. And that's the process for finalizing the task force work. And it's in the agenda there. So basically topic areas that are still, I'll call it pending. We're looking to get staff verbal feedback on those areas. So basically a Zoom meeting or a call with staff to get their take, initial take anyway, on the draft and provide feedback and guidance verbally. Then it goes to initial task force approval, and we have a couple of those teed up tonight. Let's see how it goes. We've got heritage resources and also environmental stewardship. So following initial task force approval, then we'll go to a more detailed staff feedback step, and that will be feedback that staff provides in writing, and that's going to take a little bit longer. And I don't, not sure how many weeks, but definitely weeks, maybe even a couple of months. But let's I think it's going to vary from topic area to topic area a little bit. And then the final task force review, once staff has provided written feedback, there'll be then the task force will look at that and then make final recommendation at that point on the topic area. So, and then as it's shown there in 3B, community engagement occurs after task force final approval. Now, what I didn't put in there was something else that was discussed, and that's when the topic area drafts will be posted online. There seemed to be a consensus that until there was more substantive feedback from staff, or at least feedback from staff, basically folks wanted to hold off on posting that. That may again vary a little bit from topic area to topic area, but the idea I think is to get pretty far along before it's posted on the website. Now that said, all the drafts at this point, when someone asks for them, are shared. So there's nothing secret here. This is all an open process, and let me just stop there and make sure that this is. Does anyone have a recollection or want to do a different process for finalizing task force work? Is this process, does it make sense, or is there anything missing or stated incorrectly here?
John Mooney has a hand, virtual hand.
Yes, John, please. John?
I think he's muted.
Thank you, Walter. I apologize. I think this is implicit in what you said, but to make it explicit, based on what I heard in our previous meeting, that after we get the detailed staff feedback, that we will actually then do a final draft before we take it to the task force for vote. Is that correct?
Yes, there would be an opportunity to adjust the task force recommendation once there is detailed staff feedback. That's correct. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, John. That was implicit, at least I think. And we can make that explicit. As a matter of fact, it might be helpful to maybe draft this up a little bit more formally and send it around just so everybody can make sure everything is understood. Any other comments or edits to the process?
Yeah, I see Mark and Michelle both have a hand. Mark.
Okay, let's go with Mark first and then Michelle. Thank you, Jose. You're really helping tonight. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm back on 2 screens. It's helping.
So one question is on the community engagement. If we're taking the community engagement after the task force has given its final approval to the task force report, what happens to that community feedback that's different from just holding a regular old planning commission or board of supervisors public hearing on draft text? In other words, how does the community input get folded into the recommendations that go into whatever the final language is that goes to the planning commission and the board of supervisors, if we're doing it after the task force has already washed its hands of all of this?
It's a good question, Mark. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
That was my question as well. It seems we should meet again after we get the community feedback.
I agree.
Or do it concurrent with the staff giving their detailed feedback, so that we're putting this draft or this interim report out for public comment before the task force is completing its work. Because if it's going to take the staff, 60 days to evaluate the reports, I'd rather use that time wisely by trying to get some feedback from the community that can go into how we formulate a final task force report versus waiting until the end when there's no chance for us to change anything in response to the community input.
Right.
I think that depends on the level of feedback we get back on the initial round with staff. I mean, if we at least get back a level of feasibility so that we're not presenting something to the community that might not be able to be included, or that wouldn't, we don't want to set up a scenario where it's just what we're presenting isn't close to what the final could be.
Okay.
I hear that. I guess from my perspective, I guess the question is, how do we know what that is? Right? I mean, if we thought today that something that is under discussion now probably won't end up in the final product, I'm not certain we would want to even push it forward for staff to evaluate it. What I'm thinking of are things like the environmental provisions where we need some input from civil engineers who do this work daily versus sort of the policy goals of how do you get from A to B, or how we deal with some of the, whether it's the affordable housing or some of the other things, just to try to get some feedback from folks who do this, or even the property owners, candidly, who've not been a real party to the conversation, just to get it out there into the public and let them start to digest it, even
So
as staff is evaluating it.
We did discuss the property owners last time, and they do have ample representation on this committee.
Right.
I-
Well,
I-
let's Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Well,
Wrap up and then we'll go to Michelle.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know that they would necessarily agree about the words ample. I'll just leave it at that.
All right, Mark. Michelle, did you have additional comments?
No, I'd like to hear what others think. I mean, I do think that there is quite a bit of representation. As I said last time too, it's, you know, a significant difference too from those who are volunteering their time to serve on this committee. So that's what I'd like to add.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Okay, and we have several more hands, so let's go Lynn, and then Jan, then Gary, then David. All right, Lynn, you're on.
Thank you. I just wanted to add my 2 cents that, you know, in terms of making sure that the representation is there, I think it really is a linear process. I don't think that we can have staff in the community bringing, you know, reviews and concepts to the table. I really do think that it has to be a linear process in order to give everyone an opportunity to review and then have a period of time that they are able to provide their comments and feedback. And then we take that into consideration before we go to the next step. That's just my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you, Lynn.
Be fair.
Jan, and then Gary, and then David.
Okay, so piggybacking on what Lynn said, the transportation section is not entirely done. We voted on certain sections, but there are a few questions that have not had the vote. Also, I want to point out to staff that it would be good if they looked at what we voted on as a subcommittee instead of what might be highlighted in the transportation section. I think it's important to go back to the answers that we had and how the votes turned out in that section when they look at it. I'm all in favor of having it come back to the task force as a final send off. So it were, since we started, to see the public, see what the staff thinks, and then give it the final heave ho to the Board of Supervisors. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jan. Gary, and then David.
I think, like Lynn, it ought to be linear. I think we should get the staff input back, go through it, decide what we want to go out before it goes to the public to see, and then get that back before it goes to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. I think that's a much better process to see a clean document to the public when it goes out. It's going to come back and then come back again, but I agree with Lynn and some of what Michelle said. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Gary. David, and then Tammy has her hand up as well. So David and then Tammy.
Thank you, Walter. There's really just 2 options here, one of which is to complete our task and vote on the final version of the document or documents. And then since it's a county process for the public hearing or public commentary, the county goes ahead and we've signed off on what we think it ought to be, and the county is responsible for figuring out how to insert or not insert the public's commentary. The other method, of course, which protracts this process, but the other method is to get what we think is pretty close to a final version of each of these documents, have the county create opportunities for public feedback, and then come back together and try to figure out as a group what public comments are worth including or worth changing, things we've already decided upon, and what are not. Ultimately, I think probably the group is going to want to do the second option, and that's fine with me.
All right, thank you, David. Now we'll go to Tammy, and also Charles has his hand up. So Tammy and then Charles.
Yeah, mine is a question, and it involves you, Walter. You have said that you wanted to vet what was going out as the final. And the second part of my question is, how many public hearings are we having? What is your vision for that?
Well, it's a good question. I'm not sure I said, maybe I did say that. But there is a public engagement process that my office is going to organize. And we had been assuming up to this point that it would be after the task force is done, that we would go through that. But if there's a consensus for the task force for us to do that before a final vote of the task force, I think that could be doable. That would be fine. The one thing I would ask, regardless, whether the task force comes back after that public engagement process or the task force is done and then the public engagement process that's coordinated by my office, I would just ask that several of you volunteer to be part of that public engagement process. Because frankly, I mean, these are more so than mine. These are your voices, you know, that basically are, and I want you to be able to articulate those and also hear directly as people have other thoughts. So I just point that out. So whichever way, I would want to make sure that we have at least several task force members that are engaged in that.
Yes, and that's you know, I've been chuckling and waiting for this onslaught of, well, let's have now the development community weigh in. No, they are on the task force. All of the meetings have been open. Nobody in the development community has been on these committees in writing. And there's lots in it. We want to change a lot of stuff that the development community is going to go, whoa, this is going to cost us money. Yeah, it needs to cost money because we're in climate crisis. And the cost to the taxpayer is exponentially exploding because of more storms and climate change that is unabated. So this has to be green materials, responsible stormwater, et cetera, et cetera. It's very technical. It's very difficult to portray to the community, which includes the landowners, the residential owners, renters, everybody. So it's going to be a robust, my favorite word, process, but I'm concerned with the clock ticking. When will this be approved? Will it be approved in March, April? How many applications are going to fly through with none of this new fabulous stuff on it? So, you know, I'm trying to strike a balance between what makes the most sense and doesn't denigrate the year and a half or 3/4 or 2 years we will have spent on this when the task force volunteers are done. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you. And Charles.
Thank you, Walter. Yeah, you know, and I see the logic and agree with folks that have been talking about the process and the timeline. And, you know, I also believe that the time frame is going to be tight. You know, we're working on pretty tight timelines here to keep this linear process. And my only hope is, especially as we're going to see task force members take up the roles of being able to lay out the specifics to the community during this public feedback period, that that the process is leading up to that we can stay on schedule, and that those of us, and I'm speaking for myself here, who may be tasked with organizing some of these public gatherings and these public feedback sessions are given enough of a rampway to be able to organize and put out an event so that we can gather enough of a crowd to be able to get this information, to make it worth the time of those of us on the task force that will be presenting the materials, and that the folks that have not been a party to this process for whatever reason can get the information that they need. So that our final will have some productive takeaways from this public feedback process. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Charles. And then I do see Bill Penniman has his hand up. Bill.
Yeah, my only thought is, I mean, I find myself kind of agreeing with everyone, but it strikes me that it would be good to put information out other than a 140-page single space document. Start putting information out to the public as to what we've been doing, what some of the major areas of consideration are, so that when we go out to them, whether it's before or after the staff input and review, people aren't surprised and say, gosh, you never told us. But start to alert them and tell them where they can find more information, and some of the summaries as well as the larger document, and give them a feel for it, even if it's not the end of the road for input. That's all.
Thank you, Bill. That's perhaps an actionable suggestion there. I do know, and I think we have a couple of examples tonight. And Lynn, thank you for volunteering. I saw that in the chat. I think we have a couple of examples tonight of topic area leaders who have put together PowerPoint slides, for example. So don't know if those are tailored at this point for, maybe a little bit more in the weeds or showing changes, now from a couple months ago, but maybe that's something for the task force to consider. Maybe we would have PowerPoint slides put together on the different topics, emphasizing sort of what's different, new, and then have that be posted on the website. Other thoughts on this?
I do.
Yes, Jan, go ahead.
Okay, a couple of thoughts. I totally agree with Bill Penniman about getting some easily decipherable information out there about the main topics, maybe even an outline, so that they can begin to digest it and have questions before we try to meet with them in person and ask for the questions. And the other thing is, if you could, once you figure out your schedule as to when you could go and meet with people, let us know, and then we'll know if we can volunteer or not, because I'd love to volunteer, but it certainly would depend on when you're meeting with people and where. So that would be helpful. But yes, indeed, I think that people should have an outline, even the slides to what their appetite would be good. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. And in terms of the timing of the community engagement, community outreach for my office, frankly, I've been waiting to get a better sense of when the task force would wrap up. So I think it's, and maybe it is a process where there's not a final task force vote until after that public engagement. Maybe it's a final draft of the task force recommendations. But then, Jan, you and other task force members who go out and hear from folks, maybe there are a couple things you might want to change. I don't know, going back into it. So if there are any other thoughts on this, go ahead and speak now. Otherwise, what we can do is during the next couple of weeks, provide additional thoughts on this to Jose, and then we could come back for sort of a final process check at the next task force meeting. But are there any additional thoughts folks want to say now? Okay, well, very good. Give us some things to think about. I do believe, I think there were a lot of really good points made tonight. So some of the things that I caught that I think are potentially on the table and worth considering. One is developing maybe summaries of some of the major topic areas that for public consumption, maybe doing that sooner rather than later. Then John Mooney brought up the point, once there's detailed staff feedback, there needs to be an opportunity for the task force to adjust the recommendations or the text of the recommendations before final task force approval. And then there is the overall question, does the public engagement happen after the task force is done, or does the task force come back after the public engagement sessions and make one final look at the recommendations at that point? So I think some of those might end up taking a little bit longer than others, but depending upon I guess the concerns of making sure there's robust community input, we'll look at that schedule as well and come back to the task force next week. Any other thoughts on all of that?
I just have one. I
Sure,
was
Jan.
thinking about it. And that is, when we do the summary for the public, do we want to say what has changed and why? Because they'll look and say, well, this, this is gibberish. Well, we're actually changing this because, and that might give them an idea of what the issues are and how we handled them. Just a suggestion, and I am still in favor of it coming back to the task force. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Jane. Okay. All right. Well, good discussion. Let's move on. And let's jump right in to item number 4. All right. So we have discussion and initial task force approval on heritage resources. Jose, how are we going to do this one?
We do have Chris Daniel, who's the
There we
topic lead.
go. I like that. So Chris,
I am here.
let me turn it over to you.
Well, perhaps one of the easiest ways would be to give a short summary. And Jose, I can share my screen too and show the revisions that I think were noted and aren't reflected in the document that was
we
shared
can share
out.
now.
All right. I think if everyone will recall, we talked about this at one of the last sessions before our break. And during that, there wasn't a great deal of heavy discussion, but there were a few minor revisions suggested. In the interim over the break, it was also shared with the district representative from the History Commission, who also took a read through it, and she provided me with one revision that needed to be corrected as well. This version showing all the revisions that have changed since the July 23rd version, so everything that's being changed is in red. The one that the History Commission member pointed out, we had the wrong address here for the distillery. Otherwise, Barbara was extremely supportive of it and thought it really took things to the next level. And her and I had a great conversation about other issues involving heritage resources in the county, so or in Reston in particular. Beyond that, during the meeting which we discussed this last, I'm going to go to the section that there were some suggestions made to, which were conditions and considerations and incentives. Members suggested that shoulds in here be changed to musts in a few places. One in particular was when ground disturbance occurs, that this must be preceded by a study if it's going to require a permit or approval by the county. Not if you're just going and digging a hole to plant a shrub or doing something in your backyard, but if you're going to require a county permit or approval, it should be preceded by appropriate studies, and alternatives must be explored. Again, not saying they have to be followed, but they must be explored regarding avoidance and preservation of known heritage resources. And I think the key thing to point out to everybody in this again is the terms being talked about here. Heritage resources is a term that regards particular types of properties that are listed on the Fairfax County register, excuse me, the list heritage inventory of heritage resources. So they have to go through a formal process to be listed on this, and then be considered a heritage resource. So we've already pointed out earlier in this section that there are only a few in Reston at this current point that consideration has to be applied to. The other area where those musts were suggested, there was another must suggested from a should with regarding when there is a heritage resource identified that an effort must be made to preserve them if possible. Folks thought I didn't go far enough by just saying should, and so those were the significant changes suggested during the last task force meeting before our August recess. Again, I'll point out about heritage resources currently in Reston. There is only a small selection. We have a map that is going to be in the new section showing those. And then we also include a list of those as well up here. And those are the Bowman Smith Distillery, or also known as the Willie Town Hall, the Browns Chapel, Lake Ann, which is a historic overlay district, and I'll caveat that has its own special considerations being a historic overlay district. Sunset Hills, or the A. Smith Bowman House, since it goes by obviously two different names, the Willie Robert House, and the USGS facility, which is a federal facility, so it's got its own special rules and eccentricities. But these at this current point are the only known heritage resources in the Reston area. While we talk about in here that there has been survey efforts conducted, and we have a map showing that, of properties that might be considered heritage resources. Those properties have not yet been officially proposed to be one through the History Commission, nor designated such. So at this moment, they're only potential properties. They require an effort to go forward for them to rise to that next level. So all the considerations in here are focused on that in particular, about those heritage resources, which is really where through a county perspective, that's where the actual capacity exists at this moment. I don't want to talk too much about it. Again, everyone's given a lot of robust feedback on this. The changes last time were rather minimal, but we wanted to give folks some time to let it stew and kind of permeate in their heads. And I kind of open it up to other feedback from the task force members. I don't think I saw any feedback during the last week on it, unless I missed something, Jose. I know, Jan, I was actually working off your last set and I didn't see any notes from you. And I know, Jan, you provided some feedback in the past, but I didn't have any, I believe, from you.
Not this time, except for the pavilion. I am wondering if anybody looked into the pavilion that is farther away from the, I can't figure out which is the Bowman House or which is the other house. Is the one on the top of the hill the Bowman House?
The one on the top of the hill is the Bowman House.
Okay. I thought that the gazebo, which was moved to where it is now, was moved from there. And I would love if we could talk to somebody who was around there then, and there are a lot of people who were, who could tell us, is that part of it and should that be preserved? Because I don't think that's ever been really explored, and I have a feeling that it is part of the Bowman House, and therefore should be heritage.
Well, I don't want to speak for the heritage staff on that, but I know the heritage staff are going to look at this. And one thing that we might want to consider is, obviously in each one of these sections, somebody is going to have to go back to the county when they're going to affect one of these resources. And we could probably suss out what is the definition of that encompasses the Sunset Hills, A. Smith Bowman House property. That is the trick with most of those sites, is that the definitions on the inventory do kind of decide what is considered a part of it and what's not. And I do know from working with the current owners that the entire environment there is something they want to continue to preserve. They recognize that space is something that's significant. So, but we could definitely talk with Heritage when they do their review about how we might better define some of this listing of known heritage resources.
I would love that, especially if you could list the pavilion, just so they know that that is an item to explore whether it is or it is not to be included.
And Lynn, I think I saw you say something in the chat, but because I'm sharing, I don't think I have a way of seeing it.
Yeah, and Chris, we had
Okay.
Lynn and then
So-
David and Tammy, I think.
Okay, yeah, I'll let you handle that, Walter, because I have no idea.
So there was and I don't know where the statement appears in the, if you could do a find on the statement proposals and development utilizing preservation or rehabilitation
I know which one you're referring to.
of adaptive reuse may be considered for flexibility. We would, I think that that statement needs to be removed in terms of a flexible
You're referring to this one right here.
FAR. That one. Yes. Thank you.
So in the past, it was shall or will, and we actually reduced it to may so that there was an incentive being implied for properties to consider reusing their heritage resources, because as it's written, as it's presented now in most of the county comp plans, there is no incentive to encourage a developer to say, if you actually reuse a property consistent with these standards, you could get, perhaps some kind of consideration. And when we cited preservation and rehabilitation, those are particular standards in the preservation field that have to be adhered to, which require reuse and actually using the existing heritage resource. They can replacement or removal of the resource would not be preservation or rehabilitation or adaptive reuse. So if you had a building, an office building that was considered historic, or a townhouse that was considered historic, rehabilitating it would only allow you to use it for something that is appropriate for that building type. So a commercial building would have to be used for a commercial use of some type, and would not be able to change it into like demolishing it or something to that effect. The same with a landscape. Changing a landscape through preservation rehabilitation isn't considered those appropriate methods. It would not.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the issue is not with the proposals for development utilizing preservation or rehabilitation and adaptive reuse. It's the flexibility in the overall calculation of the proposed FAR that is giving me a little bit of consternation. And I think a few others that have their hands up will probably.
Well, I would put it to the folks that might have an issue with it, then please give me a way that I can incentivize developers to reuse heritage resources, because as of right now, I don't have a big enough carrot to hang in front of folks when there's a heritage resource. And I'm going to primarily focus this on a commercial or public structure. It's not a townhome or a house. So those are typically always embraced in Fairfax County as being reused. But for one of those properties, it's very hard to incentivize a developer to consider reuse when demolishing just seems to be the priority. The API building would be an example. If one could find a way to convince a developer to reuse the API building in a way that actually would allow them to get some change in their FAR or some other incentive, then maybe the building would have stayed. But obviously, from the perspective that it went through, keeping that structure was not financially incentivizing, and so they wanted it gone. I'm not against taking it away. I'm just trying to find another carrot I would suggest. So anyone else, obviously, who has comments, if you have a suggestion, I welcome them.
All right, thank you, Lynn. We have David, and then I think we have Tammy, Charles, and Bill, but I know we have David next.
Thanks, Walter. Christopher, a couple of questions. When I read this, unfortunately, I haven't read it more than once, but when I read this before in late July, I thought it was a wonderful piece, and from what I can tell, the changes that you've made work as well. Two questions. First of all, do you believe that there is sufficient a sufficient description, a formula or a process for identifying all these other places in Reston that you have highlighted as potentially historic value? Do you believe that there's a sufficient process, a robust process in place in this document to kind of strike out and go right out and start looking and start evaluating that? And secondly, do you have any sense that the county is going to, in the near future or the distant or the medium future, is the county planning any changes to the historic preservation process, either to to the county's benefit, to Reston's benefit, to the historic sites benefit, or to perhaps tighten things down a little bit and not provide the, as you say in this one place, the flexibility that we would like to have to make sure that these places are identified and evaluated, and if they meet certain criteria, are preserved.
So I think from an identifying perspective, because those properties that were found during the survey have not yet been formally designated, I did not want to make this document something that would give a pseudo status to them. But I did want to make it informative to developers and any other user of this that there are properties of significance in Reston that could become or might be considered these types of properties. And it would be important to be aware of that concern, because it obviously, as any parcel goes through development, it only takes individuals or a motivated group to then designate and list. And so I kind of wanted that more as an awareness tool, not as a I don't think this is the place to drive a listing of a property in here, because there's other components of the county's tools that do that. There is a larger preservation plan and policy that the Heritage Division of the Department of Planning and Development, I think that's their new name, actually updates regularly. And one thing that they've continued to call for is survey efforts. So what this is trying to do is call for the fact that there is a survey need here and push the county to maybe do that more, so that we don't have these 11th hour situations like I think the API building, or I would even say Association Drive, have gotten into, where there wasn't enough information up front. And I think development kind of got snarled in some sakes for that. So, but I don't want to speak for the county's overall objectives on it, because it really is something that requires individual or a group's motivation to actually list them. We go through the History Commission and another body to do it. I wouldn't want to try to make this the tool that goes out and says all of these properties should get their inventory listings and go that far on it. I personally might want them all listed, as a preservationist, but I don't want to make that I don't want to beat the drum for that in here. I just want to kind of be a little bit more proactive on the fact that there are properties that could be found. And I don't know. I think some of that was a county staff question I'm not capable of answering a little bit.
And perhaps that's an item, David, that in the more structured review of this, that perhaps Chris could tee up for county staff feedback.
No, that's what I was thinking, Walter, is if I'm hopefully they are listening, but I definitely think that is something that I'm hoping county staff will do a hard reality check on me in here about what is practical with what they're capable of doing. Because I tried to go aspirational and, be prepared for potential, cutting down if possible, rather shoot for the stars, right? Or shoot for the moon and land amongst stars, whatever the adage is there. Hopefully I got to some of what you were looking for.
David, anything else?
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
Okay. All right, David, thank you very much. We have Tammy, then Charles, then Bill.
Thank you. My comments and concerns are similar to David's and Lynn's. And I want to bow down, Chris, to your job here. And I want to put some gray hair on your head and say, be aspirational, shoot for the moon. We lost API. That was the gem of all gems. We will never get that back. I have attended, and this was pre-COVID, so it's over 2 years ago, 2 subsequent meetings of the heritage resource process. Mercy, it's a ponderous thing. I understand that you don't click your fingers and say, oh, that's a heritage resource, but it is very ponderous. And I love in your verbiage that you say the inventory is fluid and the staff is constantly able to add on to that, because there are some specific buildings, particularly at least one on Association Drive, that I think has been targeted, that might possibly qualify. There maybe should be a couple there. But in any event, I'm also concerned with this carrot of increased density may in fact inhibit or ruin some of the things if you're going to crowd the heritage resource depending on the plot of land. So I'm uncomfortable with that as well, but I totally get your wanting to incentivize it. But should we have to? If a person is buying a property that has a heritage resource on it, they know they're buying that property, so they have to take that into account. But all in all, I think you've done a marvelous job, and I'm torn on this increased FAR or flexible FAR, because I don't think it's specific, and I'm not sure it should go in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. And I will say, I wish I could say that folks buy property or lands and places with heritage resources or historic properties on them, and they know going in that that means they need to make a due diligent effort. But from both here and my professional work, I will tell you that that is always a surprise to many a person, that they have to keep something. And should we have to incentivize it? I know, but that's why you'll see the section does mention tax credits that do exist. And I will say there's a stellar example of them being, I think, being pursued and looked at down in Lorton with the Lower Hill development that I think is really showing off that it can be done.
Right.
But I struggled here in Reston to think of what are the tools that we might propose here and I do think, again, it is focused mostly on public and commercial and more industrial structures. It's not the, the spaces where we have homes and, it's other spaces that I want to try to encourage someone to say, you have a property there, what could you do to keep it potentially if there was some type of flexibility to it? But obviously, I'm limited by what I know about the planning process, so I may not know the right tools here. So perhaps staff might have a suggestion too. And perhaps we do need to strike this as written.
The tax incentives are huge. That to me is the obvious thing. But also it's, buyer beware. You got to know what's on your plot and not assume that there's no heritage resource there. And to your credit, you've said you must investigate. And if there is, if you have to have a permit, you have to, undergo this study. And I was at the meeting, by the way, when the API building came up, and a lady stood up there and said, no, there's nothing historical on it. And the whole planning and zoning went wild. So yeah, that isn't a surefire cure. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy.
All right, thank you, Tammy. And actually, Charles pulled his hand down, but we have Bill and then Michelle, and then let's try to move on. So Bill, go ahead.
Just quickly, I think it's a good paper. Something you said involved the word must, that if there's an identified property, it must be preserved. There's a list of 51 maybes, and you say in here that there is potentially a much larger list. I don't think we should declare must without knowing the context and what the balancing ought to be. Should is good. A presumption if you want, but a must seems too strong. And I think you get situations, and I heard this about the API building, and this is not personal knowledge, and so maybe totally wrong, but I heard that it would have been so expensive to stop the water leaks, bring it to ADA and everything else, they couldn't get rid of it intact anyway. And so, I don't know, and that may be totally wrong. So, but at least it illustrates the possibility that just because it's pretty and cool and old doesn't mean it necessarily has to be preserved. That's my only caution, but I think it's a great paper.
No, and I definitely, you are correct. And actually in my day job, I tell folks that the process and preservation that we usually go through can have the full outcome of destruction to full preservation of a building. It's meant to be, the laws involving preservation are actually mostly procedural in nature. Even at the county level, they are a process, not necessarily a thou shall like you see in a lot of the other environmental regulations where parts per million or this many, this many liters, or this many releases or takes or whatever. And here it's a lot more fuzzy. And so even in this section where we change the should to a must, it is just saying an effort must be made to preserve if possible. So even then we're not even in saying must. So
if possible could mean don't do anything. Just leave it there, crumbling and falling apart, because that's possible.
But it is true, and again, I will agree with you.
It is cautious in that. That's my only comment.
I will
leave
say,
room for decision.
Definitely, I will say, and with owners, obviously the onus is put on them to present those cases, and with the API and other buildings, the developer can definitely make the case that something can or cannot be saved. That's, there are expertise for that in all cases. So I agree. That's definitely something that has to be looked at. And Walter, you said we had at least one more?
Yes, we have Michelle, and then I do want to see if anybody who's an attendee has a comment or a question. So for folks that are attendees, if you click, and Jose, correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a while since I've said this, but if you click on participants as an attendee, then you'll have pop up a couple of icons, including a little hand. That I know that's what you do as a panelist or a participant, but as Jose, I believe that's correct for attendees as well.
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
Okay, but we do have one more task force member who has their hand up. So Michelle, go ahead, and then we'll see if any attendees want to make a comment.
Oh, I'll just be very quick. Chris, as you're thinking about that one about the FAR, my holdup was with just on how do we define FAR flexibility, and that could mean many different things. And so that's what gave me some concern. So if we're going to do something there, let's just make sure we define, or we have a real firm idea of what it means. And the FAR flexibility was just, I didn't know. I mean, could it mean significant density is given, or, who's deciding that?
So I think I just want what I've heard. If we want to recommend possibly moving this forward, which I think was something, and obviously, Walter, I know you want to let any members of the public chime in, is I recommend that right now we strike this, but leave it for county staff to obviously suggest if there are other methods or revisions that we might, consider after the review. That way, because I think this is the one that's kind of honestly the largest obstacle for success here, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, Chris, let me just jump in. Sorry, Michelle, just a sec, but yeah, thank you for suggesting that. Let's see what any attendees might want to say. But what I was going to suggest is maybe for this issue, as well as maybe one of the must versus should in a couple of places, that frankly, those get flagged for staff as area that the task force would like feedback, in terms of getting staff take, as well as perhaps any other suggestions for flexibility beyond just FAR that might be appropriate in staff's record, because this is coming back to the task force.
I would agree. That would make sense to me, but obviously we'll handle however we want to vote on that after we hear public input, if there is any.
So Michelle, did you have anything else? Sorry to interrupt there.
No, I just wanted to, it was the FAR flexibility, just those two words. I just wasn't sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Jose, do we have any attendees with their hands up?
I don't see any hands.
All right.
John Carter, could I just?
Oh yes, John, please.
These are two house cleaning. One, do you have photographs of these, and if you do, could you put them in a file and then we could incorporate them into the document? And then the second question, are there really two historic houses on Old Reston Avenue? Or is one on Old Reston Avenue and the other one is on Reston Parkway? There used to be two, but I think the second one is gone.
John, I think you're right.
I want to jump in here. There is one historic house, that's the Bowman House.
It's the Bowman House.
There is another house in the woods. You can barely see it. It's through, there is a condo development that is right across from the Bowman House.
Is it
And
still there?
right on the edge, there's a house. And I believe that is one of the houses that was
I'll
mentioned.
venture, John, and Jan, I have not been out in the woods out there. I don't make a business of traipsing out in the woods in
Oh, you can
areas.
see it. You don't need to traipse. Honestly, you can see it from the road.
But
You
I
can
do think
get
it's
to it
easy.
through
This
Ivy
is,
Oak.
Okay,
You can actually drive up to it from Ivy Oak.
but is it still there? That's my question.
Well, unless
Yes.
they took it down in
I
the
Okay.
next
see
couple of
it
years,
every
it's still
night.
there.
All right, okay.
I mean, I think we can easily ask staff to kind of do a verification check on me in here.
Yeah, I love it. They have their own mailbox. There are people living there. And it's
Okay.
from that era. It was also moved there.
And we missed the one on Reston Parkway then. I guess that's not
I
historic.
don't know about the
What one are you referring to on Reston Parkway?
It's part of that. Is it called Bowman Green?
Yep.
That's one of the Bowman's houses, but
Oh, okay. I haven't been up there.
Across from the 23-story possibility.
yes. Right.
But is
right.
it a heritage resource?
I don't know.
That may be the question, is it might not be considered a heritage resource.
Might not be. Might not be. Might
And
be
when you were
worth looking
mentioning
at.
pictures, John, were you saying you wanted pictures in here or?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love pictures in there if I could put pictures in there, but I didn't see a lot of pictures in there.
I could get a picture of the house.
Oh, no, not that. I meant like, could we put pictures in this document? I'd be happy to. I'd love
That's
to.
what I'm suggesting. If you have ones, just send them and we'll see if we can get them in.
Yeah, give it a try.
Yeah.
I think it's
Separate
very-
file, PDFs would be best. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. Any, and Jose, no attendees have their hands up, right?
No hands from attendees.
Okay. Okay, so let's then, any final suggestions, comments from task force members? Okay,
Just-
then,
I can take a picture of that house, I think. So
all right, be
people-
careful if there's somebody living in it, though. Chance.
Please be careful.
Last comment is outstanding job by Chris.
Hey.
Thank you.
all
Very
right.
good. Very good.
Well, so then, without objection, the task force then is sending this to staff for more detailed review with the items that have been flagged to be flagged for staff comment and input. So that would include the flexible FAR, the couple of must versus shoulds, and then also if there are pictures that Jan or anybody else might have to be included in there. And I think I caught it. Or any other items folks wanted to flag for staff review?
Just the pavilion.
And the pavilion. Okay. Yep. Thank you, Jan.
Walter, I've added those to this document I've had, and I will send them to Jose so that he has that for his notation to add to the document for going to staff.
Okay, good. So this is not a speak now or forever hold your peace situation, but thank you, task force, for coming to this initial support. And then, Chris, thank you. This was an excellent job.
Well, thank you, everybody, for
Very
your
good.
input.
All right, Chris. Okay, one down.
Walter,
Yes, John.
if you'll permit me 30 seconds, I've already chatted with Walter about this, but I wanted to explain to my fellow task force members how I'm going to vote on these matters. Because I'm not here as an individual, but as a board member, a Reston Association board member and their rep. And since we have a rule that board members cannot take positions for the board, what I'm going to do is abstain from all votings and then wait and vote with the full board when Walter has his session with the board. So it in no way, my abstentions will in no way convey opposition. It's just trying to meet this requirement of our board rules, and which some board members have expressed concern about concerning the task force, and also some RA general members. So that explain. I want that explanation out there. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and noted that you're to be recorded as abstaining for all of these votes. Fortunately, an abstention is not an objection. So
so that's for final votes. You know, I obviously give input, but for the final vote, I can't take a final vote. So
okay, understood, John. Thank you. All right. So again, thank you, Chris. Now let's move on, Jose, to the next topic. We have the topic area lead this one as well.
Yeah, we have Bill and Tammy for environmental stewardship.
Bill or Tammy, take it away.
Tammy,
Bill's
shall
gonna
I?
take this.
Okay. So the environment section is largely what it was back in, I guess, gosh, June when we first sent it out. Revised since then. It has, but they weren't massive revisions. Some significant ones, however. The essence of it is that Reston should be a leader in the county. I mean, of all places in the county that ought to be out at the cutting edge on sustainability, environmental preservation, it should be the biophilic community, Reston. And biophilic simply means that we integrate nature into all of the development and activities of our community. So we should be a leader and not be held back that, you know, they don't do this in Annandale, they don't do this in Springfield. Well, that's fine, but Reston should be ahead. And where we can affect it, which is with rezonings and new development, we should be empowered to do that. So one of the things I'll note, so that's sort of a general introduction, and I'll sort of survey some of the particular things in it. But I want to say that since the second draft went out, the county did adopt its community-wide energy and climate action plan, CCAP, to reduce greenhouse gases around the community. This isn't just for the county operations itself. And the things we are recommending here are wholly consistent with the guidance, the direction given there, whether it's energy efficiency, renewable energy, all of these things are in there. So I guess we can go to some of the specific areas, starting on the next page. The tree canopy goal. Trees are beautiful. They are central to our identity in Reston. But they are also very important for health, physical health, mental health, comfort, wildlife support, and, well, as I say, just sheer beautification. So they are important. They need to be in here. We propose a goal of 45% tree canopy on a Reston-wide basis. Tyson's had a 20% tree canopy goal, and it was all concrete. We're Reston, we have a whole lot more to start with. So 45% is pretty modest and maybe too modest, but at least that's what we've put in here as a going in position. New development should be expected to preserve well-established trees to the maximum extent possible. We've seen a few people do this, but most of them just tear them down and plant little trees. Well, planting new trees is important. But certainly it should be required. And the landscape panels need to be designed in a way that's going to help enable them to survive and thrive. We also want to see native vegetation, trees and other vegetation. It's important not because there's some ego-driven thing about we'd like to do native stuff. But in fact, it's very important to support the wildlife. Non-native trees have a tiny fraction of the support for wildlife. So as part of the biophilic community, we would like native vegetation to be used almost without exception. I won't say there might never be exception, but our position is it must be used. The other thing is, and this is reflected in some other plans I've seen, the requirement that the developers submit and implement a long-term maintenance plan that is made as a matter of a contract with the county. The importance of that is all too often people plant trees, walk away, and they die. They wither. And it's hardly any good if they aren't maintained at least to the point several years out that they have become healthy and well established and connected with the environment around them. Next slide. Water resources is, of course, important for Reston, given our lakes, our streams, our wetlands. All the development has to take that into account and mitigate downstream harm to those, whether it's in the form of pesticides or other harmful chemicals, some of which are already addressed in the plan, but I think the plan should be stronger about avoidance and mitigation with respect to those. And there should be consultation with the downstream resource owners, which most of the time is going to be either the county, who has the downstream Lake Fairfax Park, and more importantly, really Reston Association, which has all the lakes and most of the streams. And they should be involved in planning with respect to new development. Next slide. Stormwater management is the method by which much of the potential damage from runoff, particularly from impervious surfaces like roadways and parking lots, how you mitigate the harm to the downstream. In the olden days, there weren't really any stormwater management requirements. So some of the buildings, the older ones, may never have been even subject to those. So we're really focused on redevelopment and development of new properties. The language we have about low impact development, best management practices are drawn substantially from other county plans, Tyson's, Richmond Highways, and others. Working with the feedback with the county staff, we may be able to improve on it, but that's where it came from. We didn't make that stuff up, basically. A lot of it is in the existing comp plan for Reston, and some of it is in these other plans. Okay, here's the consultation. Now, the level of stormwater management. First, if the county has stronger generic standards going forward, builders should be stuck with, we should implement those. But next page, we do propose stormwater management metrics. And again, we didn't make these up, although we did do a lot of thinking, and some of them are not found specifically in other county plans. First, we asked that the first 1.2 inches be kept on site, reused on site, absorbed into the land, captured in water retention and plantings and the like that'll use it. That reflects simply a 1 year, 1 hour storm, which happens a lot, increasingly, more than once a year now. But I'd note that the Tyson's plan already requires that the first inch be kept on site and reused and captured. So while we've upped it by 0.2 of an inch to reflect the two facts, one is climate change is getting worse and the downpours are worse than when the Tyson's plan was adopted. And also technologies have improved, such as roof systems to capture water when that's where a lot of the impervious surface is. So capturing it up there can be very helpful. There is a second piece which plays off of what's in the existing plan for Reston, and that is what to do with a 24-hour storm and how much should be captured to reduce the runoff. It doesn't eliminate it, unlike the capture in the first inch or 1.2. This is reducing the peak runoff and reducing the overall runoff. The existing plan uses a 2-year, 24-hour storm. We have those regularly. I've had 2 in the last month, just at my property, or approximately, one certainly above it and the other one close. And one, that is only a 0.79 inch, basically 0.8 of an inch, which is less than Tyson's requires for the proper to hold, capture and retain on site. So in the first draft, we suggested a higher standard, 100-year storm, which again happened more often than every 100 years, and to retain 40% on, to reduce the flow, the rate of flow by 40%. So the capturing, the initial capturing would be 3.36 inches using the math, simple math, and of which 1.2 would be captured in the first. So it's a little over that, somewhat over that. And then in the existing plan, it simply says if it's 50% or less impervious surface, it shouldn't be any worse than the current condition and prior condition. And we say, yes, it should be better than the prior condition and proposed 25% of the 100-year. The draft we circulated in, I guess it was July, although it might have been beginning of August. We modified it, listening to Mark's worries about the technical feasibility. We came up with a second suggestion, which is 40% of a 25-year, 24-hour storm, which reduces it to 2.44, which is about double what we're calling for in the first metric. Obviously, we'll talk to the staff about these issues, and it may end up the higher number, maybe this one, maybe something else. We'll talk to the staff, but we think we need to do better than has occurred in the past. Next slide, green building and green neighborhoods. Here, again, CCAP, it clearly calls for strengthening requirements for energy efficiency, clean energy, electrification, and the like. So we, in the interest of climate protection and just reduction of air pollution, lead gold and platinum instead of silver and less, emitting no CO2 on a site basis, or achieve net zero with verified offsets, incorporate solar, or at least make solar ready, high efficiency HVAC and water systems, a building plan for net zero emissions by 2040. Now, let me just note that Dominion is going to be at net zero by 2045 as a matter of law, and the county is committed in CCAP to 2050. Since we're Reston, we should be able to get there sooner. And then lastly, on EV charging, we're not saying they have to put chargers in for 50%, but they need a significant number of chargers up front, and then the infrastructure to make it easy to expand, because we know as a matter of national policy and most or many car manufacturers' plans, they're getting to 50% of new sales to be EVs by 2030. So that's the basis for that. We think it's doable. It's vastly more expensive to add later. Condos will have fights over it, and it just get it done right at the beginning. Next slide. Also, the builders' new development ought to, and redevelopment, major redevelopment, should participate in benchmarking so that people can compare and see what energy use there is and the savings. Install bird-friendly glazing and designs, green and purple roof systems, and clean air, indoor air standards, ASHRAE LEED or EPA's standards, and deep energy retrofits for redevelopment. Next. Lighting measures, I think it's pretty clear what we're calling for, the concepts to save energy and also to mitigate harm to people and animals, wildlife. We didn't have, and staff may be able to help us, we didn't have a specific color temperature guideline to give. I know RA is working on this because it affects most of its areas. So at this point, we just said, work with RA and the county to identify acceptable temperatures, brightness, and locations, and design. And then suggest using, that they use motion detectors in buildings and garages so you don't have all-night energy waste. And if you think you're worried about police protection, if the lights follow the people, turn on as the robber runs through the building, it'll be easier for the policeman to catch him. Noise mitigation, next page, is drawn basically word for word from the existing comp plan, though we added an additional proposal to limit lawn equipment to electric, so it's quieter, and limit the hours in which loud machines can be used in residential areas. There is a group out there that's working hard with the county to try and push this, and so we could be a good example. And then lastly, transportation, which was really what I was told to include in here back when people didn't want it in the transportation section. Essentially, it's a short section, but it simply makes the point that reducing transportation emissions is critical from a climate standpoint. I mean, from a climate standpoint, in an area like this, buildings and transportation are the two largest sources of CO2 emissions. And then, TOD, walkable, bikeable neighborhoods, these other things are all part of the solution. And I'd be happy to take any questions. Tammy, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, Tammy, you want to add something or?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
All right, Bill, excellent. Thank you for summarizing it in this PowerPoint slide presentation. It's very helpful. So I believe John Mooney, is that a new hand or an old hand? That's an old hand, okay. All right, I do see Chris Daniel and Mark Malcolm have their hands up. Go right ahead.
All right, thank you both. Wonderful text. I only had one suggestion that I kind of feel like I might want to see added to the green buildings section, and that was perhaps a little bit more of a call out that the greenest building is one that's already built, and perhaps encouraging development that's using life cycle and life cost analysis to potentially evaluate existing building stock before proposing new. Because while it would be great to have a brand new LEED platinum building, the embodied energy that might be taken away from that development is kind of, I think, tossed under the rug in that dialogue a lot. And this secretly benefits me in some ways, because if a building is a heritage resource and it can be reused, then, it's a win-win for me there too. But in general, though, I think where we can find ways to use what we have, it's just taking it to the next level. And I think LEED has started to recognize that more than they did in the inception of the the standard back in the day. But that'd be my only comment. Otherwise, thank you so much. I am in full support of seeing this initiative move forward.
Thank you.
All right, Chris, thank you. Let's go to Mark and then Gary. I just saw his hand go up. Mark, go ahead.
Okay, I had three sets of questions. The first one went back to the storm runoff. I was unclear which way you were talking about regarding prior condition. With that, if you're talking about a less difficult or more difficult situation, I wasn't clear in what that meant with the 50% or less impervious when it was used, Bill. Could you explain?
What the current plan says, for sites that have greater than 50% impervious cover in the existing condition, the total volume of runoff released from the site in the post-development condition for the 2-year 24-hour storm should be 25% less than the total volume of runoff released in the existing condition for the same storm. So in that situation, if you X percent runs off, then you have to reduce it. Currently, it has to be 25% less. Our proposal would rather obviously in percentages.
The reason is as most of Reston is developed, when you're looking at renovation, rebuild, the issue comes in if the prior condition was weaker or allowed the runoff to be more on that's the concern for asking that question, because I think others will ask that. I'll go on to the next one that I had dealing with green buildings. Most of the recommendations appear to be toward commercial or multi family dwellings. When you spoke to green neighborhood, the question is should the solar be required or encouraged to apply to any renovations, or does it only apply to new construction? It's tied to the solar roofing, and as was also brought forward, it's a life cycle cost decision to others. If you're dealing with one Fairfax, then it's an equity decision for homeowners that have less affordability toward renovating structures. I just bring that forward. I happen to be a homeowner who has solar on that, and I'm very happy with it. But for others, it's too expensive a proposition, and the wording here wasn't clear as it applied particularly to single family homes. So there's a little bit, I've talked about 5 different points very quickly. I don't know if you have any reaction or anybody else does.
On that one, I don't have, I'm going to think about it. The first reaction is single family homes. Well, if they're part of a redevelopment that requires a rezoning, then they clearly are going to be covered by the comp plan. If it's somebody who's living in an existing house and just has their roof replaced, I don't know that the comp plan would cover it. My thought would be that at least it should be solar ready, which only means that they run a PVC pipe down from from just below the roof down to the fuse box to allow for easy connection of a solar system in the future. My understanding is that the solar is attached to the joists, and they're going to have plenty of strength for any typical solar system. So solar ready is probably what I'd suggest for a single family. And then down the road, a buyer may decide, shoot, I'd love to have it, and it'll be easy to do, and just makes it easier for them.
I understand there are a couple of states such as California, such as Arizona that have, and some areas that have enacted much stronger requirements towards solar in renovated or upgraded housing as well as new construction. When you mention PVC pipe, normally if it's a conduit from the roof, it is not PVC, it is metal.
I know, but
when
it
you-
gives people a
and
visual
with
image
that-
of what we're talking about.
Understand. But with that, there is an opportunity here to deal with, as you said, Reston leading the state to consider this more strongly on that. With that, I have no idea in Reston what percentage of homes have become solar, but they're somewhat less than several nearby areas on that. Just happens to be 1-2% maybe in Reston. Arlington County has gotten a little bit higher. The last one I want to touch with is the noise mitigation. You had a statement to require electric lawn equipment. Is that appropriate for plan versus requirements such as that or ordinance? And the issue that comes in is a lot of places in Reston, it's commercial businesses provide the lawn service, and I haven't seen any of them consider electric, though some homeowners have gone electric. Others have remained fossil fuels.
So on that, from what I've read, there are lawn companies that are considering it because they're finding it's actually better for them to go with electric, because you can just swap out the batteries on site. You don't have to carry around a lot of dirty fuel, and it's cleaner for their workers. So I think there are ones considering whether it is appropriate for a comp plan as opposed to an ordinance. I will let higher ups make that call. As a general matter, I'd sure like to encourage it at a minimum. Back to the solar. If somebody's building townhouses, which I guess are single family, in a place, so in a new area like the TSAs or just outside the TSAs, and might come into some of these new developments. We're not going to have new developments much of any place else in Reston. There, as I think about it, requiring solar on the roof wouldn't bother me. And in fact, it turns out to be very helpful for low-income people because it cuts their energy bills substantially. So let me think about that one and how to parse it. At least solar ready, but maybe going further. But thank you for raising the question.
Appreciate it. That's all that I have. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mark. Let's go to Gary and then Mark Looney. And then we have David Gill and Jim. And then let's see if we can move on after that. So go ahead, Gary.
First of all, I'll just say it's a really great job that you and Tammy did, Bill. Great work. On the noise mitigation, it's very important where I live. To a lot of people here that we do the right things on that. It's a kind of a constant issue, especially at nights. So thanks for taking that on. Although I do see it's a tough one on electric lawn equipment for existing people, and as Mark mentioned, the companies that do that. There's something to think about. Back on what Malcolm was bringing back your stormwater management requirements. If you could go back to that slide. I just didn't understand what you were recommending between option 1 and option 2. Maybe you said it, Bill, and I just missed it.
I was the two options are simply embodied in the first draft and the second draft, and based on further discussion with the staff, they may agree that the first draft makes plenty of sense. The higher standard, the more relaxed standard, maybe they think that's the only one that makes sense. But that's something we need to talk out. But I let them both in just to say that the second draft didn't foreclose the possibility of the higher standard that was in the first draft.
Okay. Thank you. Again, great job.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Gary. Okay, Mark Looney, and then David Gill, and then Jan.
Thanks, Walter. So I'll make three quick points, one of which I've already talked with Bill about several times. The first is if you think vaccine mandates are a challenge, try lawnmower mandates. The second point I'll make is that in the notion of contracting with or requiring developers to contract with the county for maintenance of landscaping, I understand the point of that. I'll just caution that in a significant percentage of those circumstances, that contract is then inherited by the homeowners association, the cluster association, whatever you want to call it. And so that obligation then turns to the individual homeowners individually and collectively to abide by that. And so, query whether, Larry and the folks at the Reston Association, would appreciate that type of thing on a going forward basis. The third point I'll make is, and this is the one that I've talked to Bill about, and it has to do with what's on the screen now. There's a challenge associated with capturing and retaining that much water on site, not because the technology to capture it doesn't exist. It's what you do with it once you've captured it. Right now, the policy is to reduce the rate of runoff by the 25% versus the volume of the water leaving the property. And why that's important is that the rate of discharge means that you're slowing it down and releasing it over a more extended period of time, therefore reducing the opportunities for contributing to erosion of the stream valleys. If you're capturing and keeping the water on site, that necessarily means that either you have to reuse it or it needs to be able to infiltrate into the ground. A lot of Reston is built on subsurface rock that doesn't allow for infiltration in a way that if you went to southeast Fairfax, closer to the Potomac River, where you have soils that allow for more infiltration, you can do that in an easier basis. And the reuse of the water on site is challenged by the winter freezes that come. So you can only reuse the water for so many months out of the year before it's going to be freezing because you're not using air conditioning in the summertime. You're not landscape watering in the winter time. Excuse me, you're not air conditioning in the winter time. You're not watering your lawn in the winter time. And so just the ability to reuse it, you've got to pack that percentage in over an 8 or 9 month period of the year as opposed to a 12-month period of the year. So this is part of the reason why I think engaging the county civil engineers and the private sector engineers about what's technically possible in this arena is an important part of the community outreach.
Okay, Mark, thank you. Bill, did you want to say anything?
No, nothing you said surprised me. And they and I know the staff is going to want to talk about these things, so
Yeah,
we'll talk about it.
Yeah, this is definitely something.
I work both standards.
Yeah, good. Okay, David Gill, and then Jane.
Yes, thank you. And Bill, I really do appreciate all the work you put into this, a lot of thought on what I think is probably the most important issue facing us is how we want to live our lives moving forward. Just two ideas I had, and I apologize I didn't get a chance to talk to you about them before, but given that a lot of these sites are in this TSA, and one of the most significant costs for us on the development side is providing parking, would you be willing to, or maybe we could talk to staff about ways to look at offering reduced parking rates for a lot of these if you go above and beyond on your green building goals? So if you're achieving LEED Gold, LEED Platinum, maybe you get a reduced parking rate and provide less parking. So sort of a reward on both sides of it. The other idea I also had was, I think a challenge for achieving a lot of these green buildings, we put it all on new development. And one of the biggest low-hanging fruit probably out there is just figuring out a way to get folks to come in and seal their attics, put in better insulation in their attics. Maybe there's a attic fund or something that somebody could contribute to when they come into the process. And then the county could have homeowners apply to the county to use those funds to come and insulate their attic. And so, we set a standard for, if you're pre-1960 home and have somebody for on the county's dollar funded by this green fund could come in and retroactively fix that insulation problem. I think that's a pretty big bang for environmental buck that maybe is a little more effective sometimes than trying to squeeze the highest end out of, LEED platinum versus LEED gold on some of these new developments. Those are the only two thoughts I had.
I will think about those. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Bill.
All right, thank you, David. And Jan, I'm going to call on you, but let's also, I wanted to see if there are any attendees who have a comment or a question. Press the participant button and then go ahead and raise your hand electronically. So Jan, go right ahead. Jan, I think you're still muted.
Okay, thank you.
There
I'm
you go.
sorry about
That's it.
Okay, in the transportation section, I'm talking about the emissions and the possibility that perhaps we could tighten up the emissions that harm climate and health. We already have once a month emissions check, and perhaps that's not effective enough. Perhaps there's more we can do with that. So I'm just putting it out there that if more ideas of tightening that up would help, should look into that. The other thing is, what is TOD and SOV, and could you spell them out in the?
Sure.
I mean,
TOD,
electric vehicles. Yeah.
TOD is transit-oriented development, which is mainly what's close to the transit areas. But if there were a hub for bus transportation, maybe one could extend it to those other areas. SOVs are single occupancy vehicles, as opposed to buses or carpools or things like that.
Okay, I think it would be good to put in the description for others that might be reading it and not be familiar with that. Ergo,
Okay.
put it out to the public. Thank you.
I was trying to keep it on this page, but I think I can squeeze it in. Yeah, that's fine. I agree with you. It would make sense.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, Jan, thank you. Any other task force members want to say something?
I've got something, Walter. John Carter.
Oh yeah, John, please, and then we'll see. I'll ask Jose if any attendees have their hand up. Go ahead.
Wondered, I bristle at this a little bit. You use the term developers quite a lot. Shouldn't we use the county ought to be doing this as well? Some of those.
Sure.
It's not clear. It sounded as if the county was getting a pass. And the other thing, doing better in Reston sounds good, but is that enough? And I wonder if we could make at least a little bit of a case of, given where Reston is in the world, that would be a reason for doing better. And I would use the lakes. We don't want them silted up. So we do have a lot of lakes here. Also, Difficult Run and Sugarland Run, there are a couple of one of our worst streams in the county, and that might be a reason to do a little better here. I was trying to think about, well, we do have a lot of septic systems, particularly in the south, so maybe that would be a reason. I'm not sure you can grab a hold of that. I was just looking for something more than we did better just because we can, and that's a good reason, but maybe we could belts and suspenders with that would be good. I wouldn't get again, the state they seem to get a pass on all these things, and maybe that's life. But, you know, we're getting a lot of new roads, we're getting rid of streets, we're getting new roads. They should do some of these things as well. In some cases, they're the biggest violators of them, particularly the state parking along Sunset Hills. We have schools, recreation centers, other county buildings. So all of those should be doing this. But all in all, probably a pretty good chapter.
Yeah, thank you. And the making the case based on the lakes, obviously the silting up problem we know of, and Reston Association bears the cost of that and its members. The Sugarland run and the other one, perhaps we can talk, you can help me, we can talk about that so I get the language right on how to beef it up.
There's a management plan for both of those, and you might be able to clip some of those. I'm just trying to find some more reasons why to do better. Not that we need them that much.
I appreciate it. Yeah, no, that's great.
All right.
Can I just add to that? I agree with John.
Please,
and
Gary.
I assume, Bill and Tammy, that you all were had, you know, county buildings covered in here, and that's going to be important for whatever we're building, schools and so forth. So I'm sure you're doing that.
Yeah, no, I think that should be made clear. Thank you.
All right, Gary, thank you. Jose, are there any hands up in the attendees?
I don't see any hands up in the attendees.
Okay. All right. Well, Bill, I know there were a number of suggestions, areas for maybe some additional investigation or pondering at least. Are you comfortable at this point taking those to staff and getting the detailed feedback on this section?
Yeah, I think this is ready to go to staff, and it may come back different, you know, but I think that would be a productive next step. Tammy, do you agree?
Yes, and the county buildings are already have native plant and landscaping requirements. And certainly the school system is trying to upgrade their solar and putting in new HVAC that's more effective. So we didn't forget county buildings, but I think adding them in the text makes perfect sense. So thank you so much, John Carter, for that suggestion. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Tammy. Any final comments or suggestions on the environmental section?
Mark Malcolm, I failed in the earlier talk with the tree canopy, just as John Carter had mentioned, flying county buildings, FC.V. Dealing with trees, shrub inclusion on changed streetscapes. I'd put that into the chat earlier. Anyway, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Let's then thank Bill and Tammy for getting us all the way where we are. Look forward to getting staff feedback, and thank you again. So very good. Then let's move on. We're 2 down and we've got about 16 minutes to go. But so Lynn, I think for the land use discussion, why don't you go ahead? We may run just a few minutes over 9, but I want to try to hold that. So Lynn, if it works for you, after your presentation, we'll have most of the discussion at the next meeting. Is that okay?
That sounds fine. Whatever works for the group.
Okay. All right. Take it away, Lynn.
So, yeah, and thank you so much. A lot of what you all are going to be seeing tonight is what you already saw at the first presentation of land use. So what I'll do is I'm going to zoom through the things that you've already seen, but I'm going to stop on the areas that we've made changes between now and then. Okay, so what we did the first time that we presented this is just gave a high level overview of how the chapters
of the land use, or how the land use chapter has been reorganized to make it a lot easier for task force members and staff and folks that are coming into Reston with an interest in either building or developing. So we've broken it out into very organized subchapters, if you will. And we'll go through a couple of these tonight. This has not changed. This is just the Reston land use categories. What we've done is we've brought that into a table that's very easy to see what those residential and non-residential land uses are and what the densities are for those areas, and then also offers the description. The land use calculations. This is something that Commissioner Carter and I did have an opportunity to meet initially with staff 10 days ago. And this is one area that we are in the process of sharing. So we're collaborating with staff, and we have a cross sharing of data. So we are still waiting for some data from staff to complete this section, but this is where we are today in terms of the residential and non-residential calculations. And it shows what the assumptions are that we made in that right-hand navigation area. So this is one of the areas that the land working group spent some time on. And the item number 1, which you will see, let me just see where this is. So this is item number 1 is Edgewater Park. So that's right up here. This is, I think, to be renamed the Kathy Hudgens Park, but this is up near, I guess it's Waterview Cluster or Waterview Condominiums. We feel that that needs to be changed to open space since it is open space, but it is also going to be contributing to the new Reston Civic Center, Central Green, whatever we're going to be calling that area. So our map recommendation is to change that to green. Number 2, and I'm trusting that you all can see my cursor when I'm hovering over an area. The second areas that we're looking at, number 2, and those are these neighborhoods that you'll see on this larger map, more in the northeast segment, and then also in the south. This is Deepwood Estates. We just need to make sure that those non-PRC neighborhoods can be verified with Reston Association. We did learn with our meeting with staff that these are color coded to comply more with the county-wide land use categories as opposed to the Reston land use categories. So the colors are a little different, and it threw us off. The number 3 item is located here. It's actually in the legend over here, and it pertains to these pink or salmon colored areas that we feel right now it reads office. And we really do think that it would be more informative for those looking at this map and would match more with the plan text to change that to read office, industrial flex, R&D. And we did have a discussion with staff about this one as well. So we think this is a good compromise. Item number 4. Right here. So we've got the exploded map. This is a Reston Greenway. So this is just south of the W&OD Trail between Old Reston Avenue going down to Michael Faraday Court. And it includes the soccer field here at Isaac Newton Square. I'm hoping you all can see that.
And then finally, number 5, we just think that the base map in its entirety would be much cleaner and more legible if we could include major roads. For example, Reston Parkway, and it's not labeled, but I think that's Reston Parkway right there. And then Wheelie Avenue, we think is right here, but it would make it a lot easier for those viewing the map if those roads were identified. This is one of the areas that we already reviewed. This is the transit station areas. And we tried to at least point out where some of the landmarks that we would be familiar with in viewing the map, so we know where they are. But I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because we already did that. Now, this is an area I want to spend a little bit more time. Now, the transit station areas, I think this portion of the land use chapter probably garnered the most attention from the working group. Again, this subchapter is organized to include an introduction. We included area-wide recommendations for the transit station areas, and then went into some detail about the Wheelie Station area, Reston Town Center, the Herndon Station, and thank you, Mark Malcolm, for your inputs on that. And then, of course, design and placemaking for the area. So at a high level, I want to focus on some of the changes that were made in the Wheelie Station area. For Preston White, there is no residential recommended. The Meridian assemblage, that is Samuel Morse Drive, I think that is going through, and there are no changes recommended for that area. The Fairfax County or Fairfax Business Center, I could point to it here. I think it's right in there. The Fairfax Business Center is one of the areas that we are recommending that we keep as industrial. Roland Clark, that is going to remain at 7525, so it's going to remain as is in the plan. Fannie Mae, this is the property that we feel that it is extremely important for us to preserve those lily ponds and protect those as RPA. And then Michael Faraday Court, right now that is zoned as I-1. That allows very little residential, and we are not making any recommendations to change that. So that kind of shows what the plans are, what we're looking at for Wheelie Station area. The Reston Town Center, I know we spent a lot of time on Reston Town Center when we presented previously. And as I said, the North Town Center changes have already been reviewed. There is a possible opportunity to expand the hospital at Reston Town Center. And then the Spectrum 23-story building, we're not recommending any changes there. It is approved as is. And I think that approval was fought for, but so that covers Reston Town Center. The other area, Herndon Station, there is some language change about the availability of county-owned vacant land close to the metro station presents an opportunity to realize the desired mix for transit station mixed use area of 50% non-residential and 50% residential uses. So with its location next to metro, we feel this site would be appropriate for new corporate headquarters for an affordable housing development and community facilities. So that is some wording that you will notice in the next iteration of the land use chapter. And then, of course, we go into the design and placemaking there. Okay, I think we've already covered the town station areas here. I did give you some more detail here. There's no reason to repeat that. And again, this just shows some of the logic that we've brought to the land use chapter, where we're focusing on TOD, Jan, transit-oriented development, and non-TOD, non-transit-oriented development, which have different requirements for FAR and the mix of residential, non-residential. Now, here we get to, we're still coming up with, what do we want to call this? So I think this might be a fun thing if we have a task force competition. We should do a naming competition. But this is, again, the Reston Civic Center. We've added Central Green, only because that is such a big portion. And we're hoping that this is going to be a wonderful portion of this new area. But one of the things, again, as we reviewed before, Innova would have blocks 2, 4, and 6. That would be housing or residential. And then the remaining blocks would be Innova and Civic Center activating retail. And when we say activating, we're talking about, I just learned this, but we're talking about making it an activity center where people will gravitate to that area for functions or festivals or what have you. With the village centers, again, as I pointed out in the last presentation, we do not show Tall Oaks as a village center, but we do feel very strongly, and this was another item that we had the pleasure of discussing with staff, just in terms of the fact that, you know, the comprehensive plan is the vision for Reston's future. There were areas that I believe the village centers were designated as, you know, higher density, and that's not what they're there for. So we want to make sure that the density range for the village centers does not exceed this 13 to 20 dwelling units per acre. And again, it's hoped that, you know, any development or redevelopment would come in at the lower end of that spectrum and see if folks can earn their way up to the higher. Convenience centers, we've already gone through those, and other commercial areas that really, I don't think that there are any changes to those since the last time that we met. Now, this is one of the areas that we are so very grateful to staff for helping to clarify both the Reston neighborhoods, the PRC area, and the non-PRC areas. This map, I totally missed this map in the comprehensive plan. So, yeah, great, thanks. I don't think Bill Mayland is on the line, but thank you so much to him for directing us to this map, because it really answered a lot of questions. And this is one of the areas where the neighborhoods section of the land use chapter is still in progress, but we are pulling a lot of the content from the existing plan into our current draft. So we have received comments from a couple of folks, received comments from Bill Penniman, and we have been responding to those comments as they come in. So If you want to send comments and you haven't yet, please do. We're really looking forward to hearing from everyone, and we look forward to getting the data that we need from staff in order to complete this chapter draft. And I think that is my last slide. It is.
All right. Lynn, way to go.
I got through, and it's 9:01.
Yay.
Well, that's fantastic, Lynn. Thank you so much. If the task force is willing, let's just go just a few minutes over, because I did see a hand or two that I do want to get to. Myra, did you? Yep, Myra had her hand up, and Myra, you have not spoken tonight, so please go ahead.
Okay, hi there. I've got just 4 or 5 things I wanted to point out or ask, and we can address them at the next meeting. Maybe just get a little pen. The first one is, Lynn, on your second slide, there was a chart that showed, I don't know if you can share your slide again.
Should I reshare?
Density levels.
Let me reshare.
I'm sorry, you have to go back.
No, this is why we're here, right?
There was, staff had told me that there was a definite mistake in right there, that blue chart. They had said that they made a mistake in the text. Do you see where it says high density multifamily? It should not say greater than 50 dwelling units an acre and leave it unlimited. They meant to put cap on there and they didn't, and it needs to be corrected. So if you could point that out to staff. I don't think the person I spoke to is even with the county any longer, but he did admit that it was an oversight. That's number one.
Thank you.
Number two, I'm hoping, I don't know, I did miss some meetings, but remember we met with the county, we went over this, all the population and what it could be and what it might be. And, I would like to see what is in this land use plan and kind of compare it with what we looked at before and talk about where there were changes or what changes there are. And maybe just revisit that, because I felt as a group, I don't remember us actually talking about where we're going to land on that number, or I'd like to see the comparison between the two. So we can leave that for another meeting, but I'd like to revisit that conversation. Another thing, and this maybe is directed to you, Walter, but in the Tyson's Corner plan, it says many places, or at least a couple, that the public facilities will need to be operational in time to meet demand generated by new development. And we brought that up, and I don't see that we adopted that language. We keep saying with development, or will occur in conjunction with development. And I'm wondering why we wouldn't use some of the language that's used in the Tyson's plan. Is it not appropriate? Is it something that we are just choosing not to do? I just was curious about why we're choosing to not go with a more aggressive language. That's one. And then I've got one last thing, and this is to you again, Walter. The prior planning commissioner, he removed a stipulation that required the village centers to have to undergo a comp plan amendment prior to redevelopment. And I just wondered, is that something that we can put back in the plan or revisit? We talked about that as well, and should developers have to undergo a plan amendment or not, or I don't know how you can reverse what was done. That was just another thing that I thought about. So those are your 5 things. Oh, and can we put page numbers on the document? Because I couldn't find any, and I was trying to reference page numbers and I didn't see any.
All right.
That's a lot to digest.
No, that's very, very good questions. So thank you, Mara. And I do see.
You don't have the answer name. We can revisit next time.
Pardon, Mara? What was that?
We can revisit those to the next meeting. Those are my questions.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. No, we'll get this at the next meeting. So I believe I see Jan and Mark Malcolm and David Gill. I think all you 3 want to say something. Go ahead, Jan.
Oh, it's just that whether this would be appropriate to have the Pine Crest Greenway mentioned in this land use recommendation, or whether it stays in transportation. The Greenway, the slides were sent out to everyone. So the white paper and then the slides from Jose, so should know about the Greenway, whether it can be incorporated in this section or another section. It's my question.
Okay, Jan. Yeah, let's bring that back, I think, to the next meeting. Lynn, is that good? Okay. All right, good. Mark Malcolm, and then I see Mark Looney, and then Bill Penniman.
I agree with Mark Callahan's comment of comparative changes. I think it's slide 4 is an example in Lynn's presentation. It'd be the next slide, I believe, to go one more. Okay, stay with that one for a second. With this, you highlighted the Sprint Campus Industrial 0.5 in yellow. Was there a reason for doing so? Because the plan is eventually for that to be at 1.5 bar, the 75 residential, 25% non, though it is what it is now. What was the rationale for highlighting it that way? Any comment?
That is a good question, Mark. This was highlighted from our presentation that we did in July. So I'm going to have to go back and review my notes from that meeting. So if I can bring that back to our next meeting.
Yeah, but that is one that is intended to be totally redeveloped from what it is now as an office park. Road network is likely to stay the same. It has a water retention pond area and such, but is a very prime piece of property for why T-Mobile retains it as it is. It's no longer a Sprint campus, it's T-Mobile's campus.
Right.
Correctly. But there was another slide that you had that was looking at the TSA residential, non-residential, and you had what the, it was not this one. It's sort of a table. Keep going backward. There, that one. Recommendation, you have just the dwelling units, but what would be somewhat helpful is possibly to also add a column that identifies the FAR, if it's appropriate to do so on that, because that gives a linkage to the prior comprehensive plan. Just a thought.
Thank you. Point taken.
All right,
That's
Mark.
all that I have for right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And let's go to Mark Looney and then Bill Penniman. And then unless there are any attendees, we'll wrap up land use and just have one more item. So go ahead.
First of all, let me say that I feel bad for John and for Lynn, because invariably I feel like we've been talking about land use in the last 15 minutes of each meeting that it's been brought up. So I apologize that I haven't had a chance to get into this in more earnestness as we've gone through. Two things. One, just to clarify, I think the category of greater than 50 dwelling units to the acre that Moira was talking about earlier needs to stay in there, because what is allowed in the non-PRC TSA areas, meaning those areas that are in the TSA areas but not zoned PRC, a number of them have already been zoned and developed at substantially greater intensities or density than 50 dwelling units to the acre. And I think if you have that cap, you can't achieve the projects that you want to see at the TSA areas. There's still, at the moment, the 50 views per acre limitation of the PRC district, but that's different than what's been done, let's say, at Wheelie Avenue or in some other areas that are not zoned PRC at the moment. So whether we call it, I still think you have areas that are high density in that regard, but they are either greater than 50 dwelling units to the acre today, or that you want to have the ability to go greater than 50 DUs to the acre in the future to achieve the use mix expectations. And it's particularly true on small parcels. The other thing I'll note is the charts are helpful, but I think it would be good to see a red line of the plan text for each of these areas to understand not just how the charts are changing, but how the text is changing, because it's a little difficult to follow the charts sometimes with what's happening in these various locations. And I don't know whether that's something that will happen when the staff is working with you all to evaluate this going forward, but it'd be good to kind of understand how the text is being revised in addition to the numbers overall.
I appreciate your comments, Mark. And actually, your last comment is something that we had received from staff. And I think it was Chris Caperton in particular that requested a red line version. There are some difficulties in providing that, in that much of what we did with the land use chapter was to take existing paragraphs and just reorganize them. So if we were to do a red line version, we would be distributing a red document. So everything would be completely red text. So what we're doing is we're trying to come up with a way to, maybe somebody said, maybe you could do footnotes. We're looking for ways that we can make the changes more evident to the reader without going through a red line version that's going to be completely red text. So I can tell you that we are looking at ways of accomplishing that.
It's great. And I'm not trying to add to your workload. I know it's difficult, but I think it's going to be helpful for people who are not as familiar with the discussions that have gone on to be able to turn to a specific page and see what's changing for them. And so I'm just anticipating, what the questions you might get.
Maybe we get Don Elliott to come help us from Clarion.
All right, Mark, thank you. And let's then go to Bill.
Lynn, I have a procedural question, but I guess it's for you and John Carter. And that is, between now and the next meeting, are we going to see any new documents? I mean, you've described changes you're making. Are we going to see those before the next meeting, or at least see the maps, or just have a sense of how we're preparing for the next one?
To answer your question, Bill, I would like to distribute this next iteration of the land use chapter as a draft clean document to the task force, so that at least you can start reviewing it. I think it's going to take us a lot of time to make all of the footnotes that are needed. And, granted, a lot of us are volunteers. We don't do this as a full-time job. So it is going to be
Seems like it, doesn't it, Lynn?
But yeah, my desire, and in the spirit of transparency, is to make those changes evident to folks. But I also think that it's important for us to get this information out to the task force in a timely manner. So in order to do that, I do plan on sending out an updated draft that is just a clean document. And maybe somebody else has a way of taking that document and comparing it to the comp plan, that there's some new software application out there that will go ahead and just do it for us.
And will those maps that you were showing, I guess maybe the slides will be available. It would be nice to be able to blow them up and look at them more closely. That's all.
I'll send the slide presentation out to Jose with updated land use chapter.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you, Bill.
Fantastic.
Okay. Somebody have a last comment there, or question?
I've got a couple, Walter. John Carter.
Yes, please, John.
What, in terms of making this work, there's a discrepancy between the zoning ordinance and the land use plan. I know people are reluctant to make zoning ordinance changes, but it should be corrected. The zoning ordinance should match the land use plan. What the difference is, there are more categories on the land use plan than in the zoning plan. The second one is the streets and the zoning. It's one of the reasons why Lynn was saying we need those streets on there. It's unclear what the streets are zoned, and I think that's in general true in Fairfax County, but the streets adjoining well, a lot of streets are left out. Reston Parkway, Fairfax County Parkway, those are left out, and they should be added to the PRC zoned area when it's appropriate. So those two are implementation steps. I know that's a little unusual for our plans, but it would get into zoning ordinance changes or at least guideline changes. But I think we plan on, it's going to be hard to show the differences between the old and the new. But we're going to try to get all the changes in there beyond, and we've gotten comments from several people. And we made changes tonight as well. And so we're going to try to get all those in the plan pretty soon. But yeah, this is a working document, and there's always going to be things to find. But what's the mantra? That don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So
Okay, so John, anything else?
Walter, may I make Lynn, I'd like to make a request of you. I understand the difficulty of coming up with a comparison of the draft that you're working on with the original 2014-15 plan. And I understand you're working on it. When you come up with your next draft, I would beg you, please, to somehow indicate, if only by highlighting rather than track changes that you're making in your next draft you're sending out to the one that we got, that we discussed tonight. So I've read, I thought it was excellent work. I've read it twice. I'd rather not read the whole thing 3 times though. So if it's possible by highlighting, just to indicate the difference between the present version and the next one.
So you're talking the last version being the July.
The one that has been posted online.
Yep. Okay. We can do that easily.
All right. So thank you all. Let's, Lynn and John, this has, I know, been a tremendous amount of work. Lynn, thank you for championing
It's
this.
not just me and John. The other folks that are on the working group put in a lot of work, and Tammy and Jennifer Juszczyk and Gary Maupin and Dennis Hayes.
Michelle.
But yeah, John has been, with his background and his knowledge, has been instrumental in getting us to where we are today. And
thank you, Lynn. Thank you all very much. And let's keep going with this. But I do want to do one more thing before we wrap up tonight, and appreciate everybody staying a little bit late. Jose, can you take this last agenda item in terms of topics for next meeting?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So yeah, the last item on the agenda was actually to discuss with you guys, since we had two topic areas that we kind of got some initial task force approval. Any topics, working for the agenda for the next meeting that you guys would like to bring to the task force for initial approval. I know we have, I think Tammy said it, 12, 13 topics, and we did do 2. So that made bring that down to 10 or 11, but any suggestions? I know some of you guys have met with staff or had talked and got some feedback back. So yeah, any suggestions on
Public art is ready to go.
Thank you, Tammy. So we got one, and I know we'll have continued land use discussion at the next meeting. Was there any other topic area that any topic lead would like to bring back?
Jose, this is David Vanel. I had an extensive conversation with several members of county staff last Thursday, and I should be able, within the next couple of days, I should be able to put all of that together and edit the document you have from the end of July. pretty extensively and make it more complete.
Okay.
So
well,
I should that should definitely be something to talk about on the 11th, and I should be able to give you and the other members plenty of time to review it before then.
Okay. Well, we have two on, that were nominated, but if there's any others, please feel free to let me know.
Jose, didn't we already do commerce?
I think we
Right.
got, Gary, do we get a, okayed by the task force on commerce?
I felt, wait a second.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so we don't need, do we need to bring that one back, Tammy, or you're saying? we do?
No.
no.
Okay. So we don't have to bring commerce. Okay. Well, yeah, please feel free to let me know if there's any other topics that you guys want to bring to the task force, either for the 11th, if we get to it. So, Supervisor, we got two, public art and housing.
All right, thank you. Sorry, I had to take that call real quick. Excellent. Well, good work, Jose. So is there anything else come before the task force this evening? Final things?
Not for this evening, but I've got a notion. I talked to, it's the graphics. So, some of these things, the recommendations are in the graphics, such as transportation. We have the grid of streets, and so anybody has graphics, please contribute, I guess is the point.
All right.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think that's going to be a lot of work to get us to the end. We probably need some expertise help for somebody like John Carter, because it's a lot of work to get the graphics done.
Okay. All right. Thank you, John.
Transportation, open space, land use, and heritage resources. I think we could use some graphics for those. Anyway, enough of me.
Okay. Any other final comments, questions? Okay. Thank you all again. It's 9:23. I know we went over, but I think well worth it. Let's keep the momentum going. Thanks everybody for everything you're doing between these meetings. That's where the real work is getting done, and we'll see everybody again in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night,
Night,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye now.
Night.
Walter.